Greetings and welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel for a little quick leather project that is great to make out of small pieces and scraps and ends and just all those little bits of leather that you're going to accumulate if you start doing leather work, um, that are too small to use for a really big project. And this is a storage sheath. Now this, I have two here. This is the one we make in the video. This is one that I've had for a little bit. And a storage sheath is just a little protector to put a knife or other tool in when you're going to throw it into your toolbox or into a drawer in your kitchen, right? So this is the little storage sheath that I made for my favorite little carving knife. Just keeps it protected. And this one that we're going to make in this video is a storage sheath for a kitchen knife. Okay. So this is made from a narrow strip of brain tan buckskin and one of the the other kitties coming. Our cats love to come and interrupt when we're filming outside, and now they're fighting with each other because they're cats.
So fun.
Made out of a narrow strip of buckskin and a one of the deer ankles that we alum tanned in an earlier video on this channel. And as you can see, it just holds this bread knife nice and secure. And making these for your edge tools will keep them from clanking against each other when you put them in a drawer, in a box, in a toolbox, or whatever. Not intended to wear on the belt, intended to sit on a surface and keep things protected. But still a very nice little project, very simple, and a very good way to use up some of those smaller bits of leather that you accumulate. So, I'll make sure that the video where we made these, where we tanned these deer hock skins in the first place is in the end screen. And let's go inside where it's warmer and my fingers aren't freezing off to sew, and I'll show you how I made this little sheath. Now, a storage sheath is sort of a universal affair. It's not a super fitted sheath for a specific knife to be worn on a belt. We're talking about a sheath that's a little more general, that you can stick many different things in and put them in a toolbox or in a drawer in your kitchen and not having bang them into each other and taking the edges off. So this is an example of a little storage sheath that I use for my favorite little carving knife. Okay, and it's just a roughly straight piece that is big enough to accommodate the knife and then has a little fold flap. And you can see this takes a little bit of twine or a little leather thong, and this used to have one and I stole it for some other project that I needed it for quick, and I just haven't put another one in there. Right? So, and then this goes in the toolbox and it keeps my nice keen edge from bouncing around other metal objects and thus damaging itself and or scratching things if there's, you know, wooden handles or something nice in there that I don't want scratched. So what we're trying to make here is a storage sheath that is fairly universal for a kitchen type knife. And I just grabbed this little bread knife, is not so little bread knife, just kind of a stand-in for a fairly generically shaped kitchen / butcher knife. Okay. We want it to be relatively snug, so it's not bouncing around cutting its own bindings, but still, you know, have as much play as possible. I'm going to make this a decorated sheath because I'm going to use one of these hock skins. This is an alum tanned hock skin. This is actually one of the exact ones that I did earlier in the channel's history, and I'll make sure a link to both the video where this is getting tanned and the playlist for all of the leather tanning and working videos shows up in the end screen here. Okay, so we're going to use this, and this will be the front of the sheath. Okay, and then the back is going to be some brain tan, and we will make a fold up flap. Put that under here, a fold up flap like this out of brain tan as well. Okay, so now for shaping. Again, this is going to be somewhat generic, so I'm not going to try and shape it exactly to the tip of this knife. When we're doing this, we want to leave, I'm going to, there's two ways you can do this. Let me take a step back. There's two ways you can stitch this. One is with edge lacing, where you need a fairly beefy stitch margin, seam allowance. The other is with a turned-in seam, where you also need a fairly beefy seam allowance. So you don't want to cut it out like right to the edge of your knife. You want to leave as much space as you can. And I'm a little bit nervous that I might not have enough seam allowance for this particular blade here in the narrowest part of the hock skin. So here we have a blemish from the skinning of these pieces. So I'm just going to use that as a starting point. I'm going to come around, just to make a nice even curve there. And then I was debating whether to make this globally straight, but we need some room for the handle. So again, I'm going to use, this side is unblemished and this side's got some cuts in it. So I'm just going to make a mark here which goes around those blemishes. Okay? Have sort of a nice even curve there. And then I'm going to cut this out with said knife. Now when you're working on a fur skin, and yes, this came from a deer, but it's hair on, so we're still considering it a fur skin. You always want to cut from the leather side and not from the fur side. Otherwise, you will cut through a bunch of the hairs. Okay? Whereas if you cut from the leather side, you see I'm not losing any hair in the process of this. Okay? A nice sharp knife is your friend. Cut on this same line. Easy peasy. So that's trimmed off nice. Now I'm going to fold this. And this skin is particularly nice because it's got this nice median just from right in the front of the hock there. I'm going to fold it. And then I can just trace where I went with that. Okay. May modify that a tiny bit. Then the same thing down here. Fold it. And I can trace that. Then I will get this all cut out. I will get it nice and even. I'll make sure I like the shape. I will cut out a identical piece just by laying this and tracing around it on some buckskin. Okay. And then we'll talk about putting it together. We did all of our trimming and cut off a piece of buckskin to match. Okay. Now I have this set up so that it's inside out and facing each other. We're going to sew it right in place here. Before I do that, just to kind of show you the idea that we're going for. Give her a test fit. If you clip this right where you expect your seam allowance to be, you can put your test knife in and see if it folds over. Okay, that's what we're going for right there. Now, we're going to sew this with thread. The last several projects that I've worked on have all been thong sewing. So I wanted to do this one with thread to show a saddle stitch and a much more typical leatherwork process, much more common. So what I'm using for thread here, you could do this with artificial sinew, you could do this with any sort of synthetic thread you like. I happen to have this, this is a heavy linen cobbler thread that I grabbed for this project, and it will work just fine too. You just have to knot it good because you can't melt the ends down. But with any of these threads, to prepare your thread and hold your needle on, pull some through, take your needle, and pierce through the thread. Okay. Pierce through the thread, and then come up a little bit. Do it again. Missed. There we go. And do it again. Okay. Then pull your thread through. Pull that down. And now what you've done is you tangled the thread around itself. So we can slide this up to the needle. Okay. It's going to twist on me a bit. That's okay. And that will hold the needle in place without having some big nasty knot in there. Okay? That's a little trick. Now, I've put 2 needles, one on each end of this thread, and I have pre-punched 4 holes, 3 through both and 1 just through the buckskin. To start, I'm going to go through the top hole, goes through both pieces. And then pull it even. I have a fairly long thread on here. This is about 5 times the distance I'm going to sew. Okay. Little awkward to get started. Twisting on me. Oh, come on, you guys. Things to edit out. Okay. So, I've passed them through and found the middle. Is this in view? Okay. I passed them through and found the middle. Now I'm going to take this one through the buckskin only hole. So that both threads are currently on the back. Then I'll take the thread which started on the back. This is a little awkward working with long threads, but that's going to get easier as we go along. And pass it forward through that pre-punched hole. Okay. Pull that tight. And now I'm going to do the same thing. Go backwards. One hole. Bring both needles through in opposite directions. Okay? So that locks this nicely in place. Now, for each hole, I'm going to put 1 needle through in each direction. Okay? So front to the back. And then back to the front. Pull it tight. Front to the back. Back to the front. And don't worry if you misgauge your thread. Don't cut off enough. You can always just knot this and start a new thread. Okay? And see, we have a nice even stitch. And I think, yep, that's all of my pre-made holes. Now, as we go along, you can see it a little bit better. It's with a little bit better contrast on that side. Nice even stitch. Okay? Now as we go, poke a hole. Do want to pre-punch all your holes.
That's as is normal for leatherworking.
As is with all leatherworking, yeah. And you can just keep going along. Now you can pre-punch a bunch of holes, you can just do it one at a time, but we're just going to keep going along. I don't measure these holes. I'm going about 3/8 or so. If one's more of a quarter, fine. If another is more of a 1/2 inch, meh. Right? It's not that big of a deal. They don't have to be perfect. None of what I'm doing here is going to show. Okay? You don't want them too close together or they'll tear into each other. And you don't want them too fall apart or too far apart or they'll get sloppy. But it's not a decorative stitch, it's a hidden stitch and you're never going to see it in the final product. Okay? So they don't have to be perfect. Another way to punch your holes, get my thread untangled again, is you can get a wood, just a piece of scrap wood of some sort. Get a nice soft wood to do this, and you can punch a couple holes into that. Then do a couple of stitches, punch a couple holes, do a couple stitches, punch a couple holes. Okay? You do want to be careful that you don't punch too big a hole, especially with anytime you're working with a fur skin. The reason is, the skins that make nice furs and the skins which make strong leather are different skins. Okay? There's a couple exceptions there, right? Bison make a nice robe as a fur and they make a good leather, right? Beaver is another exception. It has a very, very thick, strong skin. But in general, the types of skins that you use for furs are very, very easy to rip. Even though, yes, this is deer fur, deer leather and deer fur. These ankle skins are much, much thinner, much, much weaker. And alum tanning inherently leaves leather a little bit brittle because of the sulfuric acid content. Okay? Before sewing this together, I did dissolve some borax and paint a little borax on the back of this, just to act as a little buffer, because I'm going to put it away and never look at it again. And that'll keep any residual alum from continually building up sulfuric acid and eventually rotting out the skin, which will happen if you don't have a buffer in there. So because of the tanning methods that we use to make a soft fur and to, shrink that epidermis around the follicles so that the fur doesn't fall out, makes the leather brittle, and things that have fur typically have thin, weak leather. So you always want to be more careful with furs. I could absolutely get away with anything I want, any amount of pressure. I will break this thread, and or the thread will cut into my skin before it damages the deer hide. But if I wanted to just grab this and tear it like a piece of paper, I could, because it's a fur skin. And an alum tanned fur skin. So we want to be careful about that. We want to be diligent and conscientious in our sewing efforts. So this is going to get awful boring awful quick. And let me just see. I think I'm pretty close to the right length of thread. But again, it's okay if I miscalculated or, use a little bit doing this job on the tips, and stuff can go wrong. You can break it by accident. Don't worry if you do that. Just do a back stitch, get them both on the same side of the leather, re-tie it, start a new thread. It's all good. So I'm going to keep going along with this and show you what it looks like when it's done. all the stitching is done. You can see it better here on the buckskin side than on the all-white fur skin side. That alum tan surface is just so bright and white. Now, just like we did a wrap over the top of the fur skin where we started, on this end side, we do that again, and then we back stitch, just doing a double round of saddle stitches back. 1, 2, 3. Now, when we get to the end here, you do half a saddle stitch with whichever string ends up on the wrong side, so that you can get both to the same side of your piece, and then just tie a good old knot. Okay. Now, if you're using a synthetic thread like artificial sinew, which is just nylon or any other nylon thread, you can melt those ends back. This is a natural thread, right? This is natural flax. So that will just light on fire and burn up, and then you restitch the whole thing. Don't do that. Okay? So just tie a good old knot and leave a couple of ends. You won't ever see that once we tuck it in. So since this was sewed wrong side to wrong side, the next thing we need to do is to turn it right side out. And this can be a bit of a pain in the butt. Now, I started fiddling with this a little off camera and just started the turn in. This little spot here where those dew claws are is a royal pain in the neck to get turned in. There's no good way to show that on camera. You just have to fiddle with it. You pull out this and then just tuck it with your fingers until you get it to work. Okay? But once you start that turn in, and that took 5 minutes of fiddling just to get that little first bit done. Okay? Then we can just slowly and carefully start working it on through. And I need to emphasize those two words, slowly and carefully, because as we mentioned earlier in this video, fur skins are fragile. Mm-hmm. Okay? Once you're far enough along that you can't quite get your finger in it, get a little pokey stick that won't tear the fur skin. I very much recommend a pencil with a nice little rubber eraser, because that's not going to poke through anything. Then when I put pressure, I'm going to put pressure on the buckskin side, not on the fur skin side. Okay? We're just slowly and carefully working it down. Okay. It'll go, you just got to make it. Little bit at a time until we get to the point that it's exposed. Now you can see the poke from that pencil is on the buckskin side. That is very much more durable. Now we can pull that out and then finish just by holding on to it. Work it down along. Do not get impatient with this.
Don't be hasty, little hobbit. Nobody here is nerdy.
No. We are not doing nerdy crafts. We never do nerdy crafts. We're also never sarcastic.
Mm.
So I cut out a bunch because that was going to get real boring just watching me sit and fiddle with this tube of leather, right? But yes, work through it gently, carefully. It'll go, you just have to be careful with it, okay? Now we'll do a little test fit, slides in there nice, perfect, and this will come over and tie. So the last bit that we need to do is to attach the ties so that this can actually be secured. So we'll take that out. Now for here, just to make this a little nicer looking, I'm just going to cut by eye, bit of a curve in here. You will be more symmetrical if you do it from both sides and come across the middle from both sides. Came a little steeper on there. Just come up and be a little steeper here. Good. Okay. Now we're going to attach a piece of thonging on each side to lace it closed. Just punch a hole. Get them even. Still using my, if you watched the Sewing with Buckskin series, I just made this little awl. It's just a piece of finishing nail glued into a wooden handle. I have a really nice awl and I put it somewhere. It's still somewhere.
You put it somewhere safe.
I put it somewhere safe. And I haven't broken it since, so it was safe. So we'll just pull that through that hole. Now when I cut this piece of thonging, I left this thick spot, this bit around this there. So we can just loop it on itself. That'll just lock in place like that. And these sorts of leather laces, as I'm sure you've experienced with shoelaces, they're going to tear out eventually. It's just part of friction and use of a lace. So when I design a project like this with a lace, I'm not so much designing it to make sure that the lace is permanently attached for all of time as I am making it easy to replace when eventually it gives up. Okay. Pull that through. Pull it through here. Also, I don't really care so much whether the green side or flesh side is up or down on this. Not really all that important in this instance. It's just a lace. It's going to be tied either way. There we go. There's our laces. Easy enough. Now, we'll put our knife in. We'll give her a tie. And we have a storage sheath. So if you like this project, I'll make sure that I link the leather making and crafting video series in the end screen. There's a lot of these sorts of projects in there that we've worked on already. We will continue to do more. And if you're interested in historic leather work, make sure you check out our Patreon site. There's a whole lot of historic information on leatherwork in there, and all of the digital downloads in the Patreon store are free to all patrons at any level. So I hope that you'll come over there and check that out. We're an unmonetized, unsponsored channel, so I can be completely honest and unbiased with you, and my recommendations and preferences and descriptions of things is none of it's beholden to anybody. But either way, whether you choose to go over there or not, I hope that you'll come back here and join us next time at Old Ways Rising.